Everyone. Hope all of you are having an absolutely fantastic day. Now that Capes is officially released, I thought some of you would benefit from a breakdown of all the different party members you recruit throughout the game. They are varied, both mechanically and culturally, so there's a ton of flexibility to figure out which team suits you best. Please note, there are obviously spoilers in this video if you don't want to know the full list of heroes who can be recruited. Down in the comments, let me know who is your favorite hero and which team do you prefer to use so far. By the way, here at Slandered Gaming, we focus on CRPGs, so if that kind of content interests you, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more videos. Alright, we are going to cover the heroes in the order you received them. Keep in mind that there's no way for me to load a previous save, so you will see a significantly upgraded version of all the heroes. Also keep in mind that both XP and skill points are hard to come by. You'll have to make decisions about which hero's progression you want to prioritize. Consequently, if I say that you should buy a particular upgrade, that's within the context that you actually like the hero. If you don't, then just ignore that advice and focus on the ones you prefer. In addition to mechanics, I'll also briefly mention personal details regarding each hero. For the most part, Capes doesn't heavily emphasize the culture or gender of its party members, but I think it's very interesting how markedly different they are from each other. First on the list is Facet. He's a Nigerian former law student who woke up one day covered in crystals his body had produced. After being recruited to the team, Facet is happy to stand up for innocent people, and a lot of his dialogue centers around trying to be a good person. He's also in regular contact with a friend from law school, who is fighting against the company in his own way. He served as the main tank for my favorite group throughout the game. Facet's powers allow him to produce crystals that can be used to protect himself, protect allies, and immobilize enemies. He's fantastic in combat situations where you need to tank powerful foes who cannot be killed quickly. He's also great at providing protection for soft targets by temporarily making them immune to damage or taunting enemies who are close to them. He has poor mobility and his powers deal very little damage. Consequently, he isn't good in situations where you need to stealth kill large groups of enemies or when the best defense is really just a good offense. When I see that one of the sub-goals on a mission is killing X amount of enemies undetected, I usually go ahead and leave him behind. Let's start at the bottom of his skill tree and make our way up to the top. The key to Facet's damage is the ability Opportunist. This allows him to attack any enemy who performs an action adjacent to him that isn't an attack. By itself, this is just okay, since usually enemies who are adjacent to Facet will attack him. The real juice is in the first upgrade, which allows him to automatically counterattack any enemies who hit him within melee distance. Facet's ultimate attack is charged every time he is hit, so it's critical to have as many enemies attacking him as possible. Prioritize picking this upgrade and he'll start dishing out very consistent damage. The last upgrade slightly increases the damage, and while it seems minor, keep in mind you'll trigger that pretty much constantly on multiple enemies, so definitely pick it up ASAP. Shield Shard prevents an ally from taking any damage or negative effects from their next attacker. This is a fantastic way to keep squishy damage dealers alive, and you'll use it all the time. Upgrades increases range and duration while also charging the ultimates for both you and the protected party member when they get hit. All of these are great, so definitely pick them up. Taunt allows Facet to target an enemy up to 7 squares away and force them to attack him on their next turn if at all possible. This is great not only to keep heat off your party members, but also to ensure enemies attempt to hit you even if you cannot move enough squares to reach them. Keep in mind some enemies charge up abilities that are then activated on their next turn. Taunting will not change the target of these charged up powers, but otherwise it's a great option to keep powerful enemies focused on your tank. It's even better if Mindfire is on your team, because instead of just targeting one enemy, the pointer for taunt becomes a square that can target up to 4 enemies in one go. The upgrade increases taunt's range by 2, and I would definitely recommend you take it. Growth allows you to use an enlarged version of your crystals to block spaces or immobilize enemies for one turn. Large enemies will have their movement reduced instead. This can be a great way to seal off enemies or prevent bruisers from making their way towards your vulnerable companions. Technically, you can use this to block line of sight from ranged enemies, but usually they can just move to a different angle and shoot you anyway. Another big advantage of Growth's is that Weathervane's chain lightning can jump from them, allowing him to hit enemies he usually wouldn't be able to reach. Hold that thought because we will return to it when covering Mercurial. Upgrades increase the damage when enemies are knocked into growths and when they are pushed while in a growth. Every little bit helps, but I wouldn't prioritize these options. Disarm, surprise, surprise, allows you to disarm an enemy. There are multiple party members who can disarm enemies while attacking them, so usually you won't want to do that with Facet. On the other hand, he's usually standing right in front of the elites or bosses who are charging special attacks that you want to disarm. You'll probably want to take the upgrade, but I wouldn't prioritize it. Crystallize gives Facet 50% damage reduction while also reducing his max movement to 3 squares. This ability allows Facet to tank and makes him your most durable party member for the vast majority of the game. Upgrades will add 30% damage reduction against ranged attacks, provide 1 additional square of movement, and slightly damage enemies when they attack you. All of these upgrades are well worth it and should be highly prioritized. Shard Strike is a punch that deals 1 point of damage and pushes enemies back 1 square. The damage is paltry, and while pushing enemies back can be very powerful, oftentimes the ledge is more than 1 square away. In addition, you need to be mobile enough to actually reach the enemies who are close to ledges, and again, mobility is not Facet's strong suit. You can upgrade Shard Strike to deal 1 extra damage and push enemies back 1 additional square. You should get both options, but they are probably late game pickups because his other mechanics, and frankly some of your party member mechanics, take greater priority. Shard Lockdown is his ultimate ability and causes all enemies within 5 squares to receive a growth that immobilizes them or significantly slows their movement. Early game, this is really nice and can shut down groups of foes. In the mid game, by itself, this isn't all that impressive, but the first upgrade reduces enemy actions by 1. Characters only get 2 actions, so you are essentially cutting their offense in half or potentially negating it entirely if they are badly positioned. That's definitely nice, and you should prioritize this option. The last upgrade will apply Shield Shard to all party members, which is also really nice, especially if that ability is fully upgraded. Alright, let's put all this together. I recommend you fully upgrade and highly prioritize Opportunist. Same with Shield Shard. Purchase it and get all of the upgrades. Same with Taunt, although you'll automatically get that, so you only have to worry about the level 4 upgrade. Skip the Growth and Disarm options. They aren't really all that great. Crystallize is what keeps you alive, so prioritize it above everything else and get all the upgrades. Shard Strike will most likely be rarely used, so I don't prioritize the upgrades, but getting the +1 bonus to push at level 4 is a nice option if you have extra points. Finally, the 4th level upgrade for Shard Lockdown is a must-have, while you can wait a while to get the last option. Do all this, and Facet becomes a durable tank who can taunt enemies, immobilize them, and also help protect party members. Combo him with heavy damage dealers and characters who are highly mobile, and you'll have a great time. That's the way I would build him, and I hope this information helps you. Next on the list is Rebound. She's a former intelligence officer who became targeted by the company after she rolled both sides of the fence one too many times. Rebound keeps in touch with some of her old intelligence contacts, including Star, who was also her previous girlfriend. She's a smart aleck of the group, and a couple of her interactions with party members are legit hilarious. She served as the secondary damage dealer and primary disabler of my main group. Rebound's powers allow her to teleport around the battlefield and attack enemies. She is the second most mobile party member you receive, and she deals the second highest single target damage. When she moves, she teleports, so Rebound doesn't have to worry about attacks of opportunity or passing over inflamed squares. This also makes her a great teammate because all party members receive a team-up option that allows her to teleport them up to 5 squares. She is fantastic in situations where you need to stealthily take out enemies, disarm multiple powerful foes, or when the best defense is a great offense. Rebound has very low health, so she can become a liability in crowded situations where it's hard to avoid damage. She's also less effective in encounters against multiple enemies who automatically attack melee combatants. Her passive is Backstab, and it allows attacks performed behind enemies to deal 1 additional damage and charge her ultimate meter. Again, Rebound is extremely mobile, so performing backstabs is no sweat, and this is great to have. The updates increase the damage by 1 against unaware enemies, making it easier to perform stealth kills. There are actually quite a few stealth missions in capes, so this is very useful. The last upgrade provides an additional ultimate charge if she backstabs 2 enemies in 1 turn. Rebound does that in her sleep, so get this ASAP and watch as you trigger her ultimate constantly. Shadow Blast allows her to disarm 1 enemy within 3 squares for 2 bars. Some enemies have really powerful attacks they can execute if they aren't disarmed, so this is useful, but there's another ability that does it better. Late game, enemies will have 3 bars that must be dissipated to disarm them, so the upgrade here is definitely worth considering. Fade allows Rebound to ignore damage from the next attack. This plays a big role in helping her mitigate damage. Sometimes you'll forego doing an extra attack and instead use this to protect her. The power does not stack with Facet Shield Shard. Both abilities are dissipated on the next hit. I think you should also take the upgrade, which increases the turn duration by 2, allowing her to stay protected for 3 turns. I would skip the disarm upgrades because oftentimes enemies will be ranged, or they will be in the process of already executing the attacks you would want to disarm from them. Sanction prevents 1 enemy from performing an action on their next turn. If the enemy queued up an action on their last turn, then that cannot be prevented. This is useful against bosses and elites, but I skipped it because I wanted Rebound wholly focused on damage. The upgrades increase its range and lower the target's initiative. Strike is Rebound's bread and butter power, allowing her to teleport to an enemy, damage them, and then teleport back to where she was. If she is able to backstab the target, it'll do 1 extra damage. Upgrades increase the damage that is dealt and the range by 1, and I would take all of them. There are 2 team-up versions of this power that you should consider. Mercurial will add +2 disarm, allowing Rebound to attack and disarm an enemy at the same time, which is superior to using Shadow Blast. Mindfire will automatically make the enemy turn around, ensuring that you backstab with this ability. Once this is done, the enemy will stay turned around, allowing your next attack to backstab them as well if you have another action. It's worth noting here that Mindfire can make enemies significantly more vulnerable to damage, making him a fantastic complement to Rebound's skill set. Teleport Spin allows Rebound to teleport to a square and attack all adjacent enemies, dealing 1 damage, 1 additional damage if it's a backstab, and 1 disarm. This is a great way to take out or disarm multiple enemies. If you catch multiple enemies with their backs turned, she could potentially get multiple charges for her ultimate ability. Keep in mind that unlike Strike, she doesn't automatically teleport back to her original position, so you have to be very careful with this. The first upgrade increases the backstab damage by 0.5, which isn't impressive, but it's necessary to get the next upgrade, which increases the move range by 1, and I definitely recommend you get that. It's also worth mentioning that there's a team up for this ability with Weathervane that allows this power to push enemies 1 square. This is the only way Rebound has a push ability, and that's definitely useful on some missions. Last but certainly not least, her ultimate ability Shadow Blitz performs 5 attacks that damage each enemy within a large area. You can manually target this area pretty far out, so it's easy to get the exact enemies you want to. Rebound would use all 5 attacks regardless of how many enemies there are, making this great whether you are trying to take out multiple foes or dealing with 1 boss. Speaking of which, this is one of only 2 ultimate abilities that could legitimately be considered boss killers. Upgrades increase the number of attacks by 2 and allow this ability to disarm, which is also bananas because you could potentially disarm multiple enemies with 1 attack. Definitely prioritize everything here. Alright, let's put it all together. Rebound is amazingly mobile and does fantastic damage while also being very good at disarming enemies by mid-game. I would prioritize both backstab upgrades. The Shadow Blast upgrade is useful, but it's not a high priority, so pick it up by mid-game. Fade and the upgrade that increases its duration should be highly prioritized. you can completely ignore Sanction. The upgrades for Strike and Teleport Spin are all important and should be prioritized. Same with Shadow Blades, get everything in the list. Pair Rebound with at least one good frontline fighter who can handle the melee heat and take pressure away from her. It's also nice having someone who can heal, and as I've already mentioned, she goes very well with Mindfire. That's how I would set her up. Let me know down in the comments if this information helped you. Next on the list is Mindfire. He's also a mind reader who avoided capture by implanting thoughts in the heads of company agents who suspected him. Unlike most of your team, he has a loving family, and you see his Indian mother and uncles multiple times. They care about him, but support his decision to join the team and fight back. A lot of his dialogue revolves around party members worrying that he is reading their minds, which he doesn't, and his bafflement that he cannot pierce Doctrine's thoughts. He also served as the primary damage dealer for my run. Mindfire is able to use his mental abilities to not only target enemies, but also give himself extra actions so he can use the same attacks more than once. He's the only character who can potentially hit enemies 4 times in one turn for massive damage, and he's the ultimate boss killer out of everybody in your crew. His pros and cons closely mirror Rebound. Fantastic in stealth missions and fantastic when damage is what counts. Vulnerable in crowded rooms where damage is hard to avoid. His passive is pushback, which is triggered when an enemy attacks him in melee and pushes them back 3 squares while also delaying their next turn by 2 squares. This is trash, and I can count on one hand the number of times it was activated. If a potential enemy was in melee distance, then Mindfire focused fire and eliminated them. Range damage is the real concern. The upgrades reduce the initiative further and increase the push amount. I recommend ignoring all of them. Next up is Disarm, but this option is different from the other party members in that it has a range of 5. Considering Mindfire can trigger 3 attacks every turn, it might make sense to use this and still pump out 2 more attacks. Upgrades reduce the target's initiative and increase the range. Considering it still only takes 1 bar worth of disarm, I would skip these options. Shift allows Mindfire to move in a straight line for up to 3 squares. This is fantastic because you cannot trigger an extra attack if you have moved during the turn. Shift is considered an action, not a move, and consequently it allows you to still trigger an extra action after moving into position. The upgrade increases the move by 2 squares, and I would highly recommend that you take it. Advantage allows you to move an ally up in the turn order. I skip this because frankly there's no ally more important to take their turn than Mindfire, and I didn't want him wasting actions on other characters. Upgrades increase initiative further, and I would skip them. Vulnerable causes one enemy within 5 tiles to take 50% more damage for 1 turn. Sick. This is an absolutely boss killer ability and makes the entire team more effective. Every time a vulnerable enemy takes damage, Mindfire will get another ultimate ability charge. Upgrades will increase the damage taken by 25%, increase the duration by 1, and give him 1 additional ultimate charge if the weakened enemy was defeated. In addition, there's an upgrade that will limit the field of vision where a vulnerable enemy can see during stealth sequences. Absolutely prioritize all of this. Telekinesis is your bread and butter damage ability, hitting 1 enemy within 5 squares for 2 points. Obviously, if the enemy is vulnerable, you'll deal even more damage. The upgrades will increase the damage by 0.5 and the range by 1. Pick up both of them, and note that there's a team up option from Facet that will add 0.5 to the damage, bringing it to an even 3. Facet is generally very useful to pair with Mindfire because he can taunt enemies away or use shield charge to provide needed protection. Focus allows Mindfire to gain 1 additional action and reuse any ability as long as he hasn't moved this turn. So basically, you cast Vulnerable, cast Telekinesis, activate Focus, and then use Telekinesis again to obliterate 90% of the enemies you'll face in this game. Without question, you want this ASAP, but I would say you can skip the upgrades, which increase the initiative of adjacent allies. Mindfire is the only party member who benefits from remaining stationary, and rarely will companions have the luxury of staying by his side. Finally, his ultimate ability, Barrage, is basically an upgraded version of Telekinesis. It will deal 3 damage to an enemy within 5 tiles. Keep in mind that using an ultimate ability isn't considered an action, so you can cast Vulnerable and then Telekinesis twice while still following up with Barrage. Upgrades will increase its damage, but even more importantly, you'll get 2 reuses of Barrage. Focus allows you to reuse abilities, and that includes your ultimate ability, so now you can make an enemy vulnerable, use Telekinesis, use Barrage, activate Focus, use Telekinesis, and then use Barrage again. After that absolute onslaught, 90% of the enemies in the game are going down. The question is, can you keep him alive while he's remaining stationary in this manner? Alright, let's summarize everything. Mindfire is fantastic for increasing the damage capabilities of your entire party while also dealing a ton of damage to enemies. I would completely ignore pushback and disarm while taking the upgrade for shift. I would also ignore advantage. Take all of the upgrades for vulnerable and prioritize them over everything else. Take both upgrades for telekinesis. Be sure to get focus, but you can ignore its upgrades. Take all of the upgrades for barrage. Be sure to pair Mindfire with heavy damage dealers who can take advantage of vulnerable enemies and a character who can tank or heal. Even better if they can do both. Do this correctly and Mindfire will literally melt everything in front of him. Weathervane is a gym rat who is constantly focused on maximizing his ability to strike back against the company. He's much more aggressive than most of your team regarding how the company is capturing heroes and torturing them. A lot of his dialogue revolves around desperately wanting to do whatever it takes to stop them. His powers revolve around using wind abilities to push around enemies and lightning powers to light up multiple foes at one time. Most of your party members can only defeat one enemy at a time, so having chain lightning gives Weathervane an advantage. He's a great addition on levels where enemies can be pushed off ledges and when there are a large amount of trash mobs who can easily be grouped together. He comes with a sizable health pool and isn't nearly as squishy compared to Rebound or Mindfire. The trade-off is that he never puts up big single target damage numbers. At most, he'll peel off 3 bars of health. Also, while he can hit a lot of enemies on the screen, it requires some legwork on your part as opposed to other damage dealers who are fantastic all on their own. Weathervane's passive is shock and it damages enemies who are knocked into him. It's not very impressive at first, but its usefulness increases significantly when you get the level 4 upgrade. Hold that thought, we'll circle back in a bit. Leap allows Weathervane to jump into a tile up to 3 squares away. This is great because his powers require very exact positioning and he's not particularly mobile without this option. Its upgrade, which increases the range by 2, is also a must-have. Punch deals 1 damage and pushes enemies back 1 square. It's okay, nothing to write home about here. Upgrades will increase the damage by 1 and apply +2 disarm to the ability, which makes it significantly more useful. Handy in the beginning of the game, but most times you probably won't use this. It's worth noting that there's a team-up power with Mercurial that adds another +2 to the disarm, ensuring that you will successfully disarm whoever you target. Gust allows you to target an enemy within 3 squares and push them back 2 squares, along with doing 1 point of disarm. This is a great way to push enemies over ledges or put them in position to be pushed over by someone else. The first 2 upgrades will increase the disarm and push by 1, and I recommend you get both of them. The last upgrade increases the damage by 0.5, and that is a very negligible amount, so only get it if you have some points to spare. Drag targets 1 enemy within 5 squares and pulls them 2 squares closer. That's just okay, but the upgrade increases the range, disarm, and pull by 1. Pulling for 3 squares makes it much more likely you can force an enemy to collide with you. Now, circling back to shock, at first it will just deal 1 damage, but the next 2 upgrades give it 1 disarm, and more importantly, you can charge your ultimate ability every time this passive is triggered. Consequently, when you want to deal damage, it's usually more beneficial to trigger shock than it is to punch enemies because you can trigger your ultimate much faster. The last upgrade increases the damage for shock by 1, and I recommend recommend making sure you pick that up as well. Chain Lightning targets one enemy within 3 squares and deals 1 damage along with delaying the enemies by half a turn. Then it jumps to every enemy within 2 squares. It can also jump from Facet's crystals and explosive barrels, triggering an explosion in the process. Dolly chaining with this ability is a ton of fun. Every enemy hit by Chain Lightning charges up his ultimate, and in the right situation, you can trigger that ability in 1 turn. Upgrades increase its range by 3 and reduce the enemy's initiative by 1. That means you could target a whole group of foes and send them plummeting down in initiative, which can be very useful. Speaking of which, there's a team up with Hyde for this ability that adds a +10 penalty to initiative, which is spread out amongst all the targets. Another powerful team-up that really helps Weathervane is Mercurial's Dash when it's paired with Facet. Dash has her run 7 squares in a straight line, and Facet can lay down a crystal in every square she touches, so she can carve a line in the heart of enemy territory, and then Weathervane can let loose across the entire battlefield, oftentimes triggering his ultimate. Very powerful and very effective against trash mobs. Remember, he's dealing low damage though, so this won't really impact elites or boss level enemies. Finally, his ultimate is Lightning Scourge, and it targets all the enemies within 5 squares, dealing 2 damage to them. As with everything else in his kit, this is great when he's surrounded by trash mobs. The upgrades increase the range by 2 and the damage by 0.5. I would pick up both of them. It's worth noting that there's a team up for this ability with Kinetic that will increase the damage by 1, bringing it up to 3.5 when fully upgraded. For the majority of the game, a ton of trash mobs won't have more than 3 health, so this is really powerful. And honestly, that's Weathervane in a nutshell. He's extremely powerful against trash mobs, but when you are facing elites and certainly boss level enemies, his effectiveness goes down significantly. There's a ton of trash mobs you have to carve through, so this is still a very useful role to have, but he just barely missed the cut to be on my permanent squad. Alright, let's put it all together. Weathervane is fantastic for dealing moderate damage to enemies who are closely grouped together. I would prioritize fully upgrading Shock. I would also take the upgrades for Leap and fully upgrade Punch. I would take the first 2 upgrades for Gust, but ignore the last one. I would fully upgrade Drag, and I would take the 2 ranged options for Chain Lightning. You can ignore the initiative options. I would fully upgrade Lightning Scourge as well. I would pair Weathervane with Facet, Mercurial, and Kinetic to ensure his Chain Lightning can hit as many enemies as possible, while also allowing his Lightning Scourge ultimate to deal more damage. Altogether, that's how I would make him more effective, and I hope this helps you. Mercurial is the loner of the group. She has no interest in being part of a team, but is left with no choice when the company escalates their hero capturing efforts. Unlike the other members of the team, she is engaged, and Mercurial's fiancé is fiercely loyal towards her. Similar to Weathervane, she is also hyper-focused on pushing her physical limits and becoming the very best that she can be. She's also Chinese and speaks the language a couple of times when she gets upset. Mercurial is the last party member who was a core part of my team, and she's probably my favorite companion in the whole game. Running around the field with her and pushing enemies to their deaths that's because she is a speedster and a ton of fun to use. She is the most mobile member of your team, even more than Rebound. In addition, nobody is better at pushing enemies to their deaths. This means she excels the most when there are ledges and open spaces that enemies can be pushed into. Powerful elites can be quickly eliminated in this manner, making her assistance invaluable. The drawback is that she doesn't have any good defensive abilities, and for the vast majority of the game, she does very low damage. Although you should keep in mind that pushing enemies into walls and objects does additional damage beyond the numbers you see on her abilities. Mercurial comes with 3 passives, more than any other companion. Attack Charge allows you to charge your ultimate when damaging an enemy. Obviously, you are going to do this constantly, so it's very nice to have. It's even better after you pick up the upgrade, which gives her an additional point if she defeats the enemy, which again, you should be doing all the time, and this is great stuff. Too Fast ensures her movement doesn't trigger attacks of opportunity, which is great for a speedster who needs to get around. And the upgrade increases her damage against unaware enemies by an additional +1. And this is a fantastic addition that you should definitely get. Mercurial also has Opportunist, but unfortunately, it's a weaker version compared to what Facet has. She deals 1 damage to an enemy adjacent to her who performs an action other than attacking her. The upgrades increase disarm and damage by +1, so there's no counterattack available. This will trigger every so often, so it's worth picking up, but I wouldn't prioritize it. Distract delays a single enemy turn within 3 squares by 6 turns. Obviously, this is a great way to push enemies down in the rotation, but I never used it since I always focused on damage. Both upgrades will reduce the initiative even further. We've already spoken about Dash, which allows you to move up to 7 squares in a straight line. This is a good time to note Mercurial moves so fast she is unaffected when running over inflamed squares. You will still get burned if you land on a burning square though. Obviously, this power is great when combined with Facet and Weathervane. There's also a version that's fantastic when combined with Ignis, but we'll talk about that when we get to her mechanics. Regardless, definitely pick up Dash and its upgrade. Quick Hands deals 2 points of disarm and half a point of damage. Obviously, if you really need a disarm, then use this, but usually there are better ways to get that done. The upgrades will add another half point of damage and another point of disarm. The additional point of disarm allows you to take off 3 bars in one action, and it's the only way she can do that, so definitely worth considering. Thrust deals 1 point of damage and, more importantly, pushes enemies back 2 squares. The next 2 upgrades will increase the push by 2 squares, bringing it to 4. None of your other party members have an ability that pushes enemies 4 squares. She can absolutely annihilate foes with this power. The last upgrade increases the damage by half a point, which is negligible, but you'll use this so often you might as well pick it up. Rushing Kick lets you move up to 3 squares and hit an enemy for 1 point of damage while also pushing them 1 square and disarming them for 1 point as well. This really adds to her mobility, and it's very difficult for enemies to be so far that she cannot reach them. Upgrades will increase the range, push, and disarm. You can also increase the damage by half a point, which you should do once some of the other important pickups have been selected. Mercurial's ultimate ability is Overclock, and it increases her speed for 3 turns by 100%. This translates into her getting more than 1 turn per round, and sometimes she literally has turns back to back in the rotation. This means sometimes she can eliminate 4 enemies in 1 round, which is a major boon for your entire squad. Upgrades increase the speed by another 30%, increase the push effect of all powers by 1 while this is active, and increases the duration that she remains overclocked. Needless to say, all of this is incredible, and you should prioritize picking these options up. Note that when this is fully upgraded and active, her thrust ability will push enemies 5 squares, which is absolutely bonkers. It's also worth noting that if Mindfire is in your group, there's a team up that increases the speed by a staggering 50%. His vulnerable ability also helps Mercurial's low damage output, so all the way around, they are a deadly combo. Alright, let's put it all together. Mercurial can pretty much get wherever she wants on the battlefield and is the master of pushing enemies into deadly situations. By mid-game, she will be able to act more often than any other character. I would prioritize getting the attack charge upgrade and also get the 2 fast upgrade when you can. I would pick up the damage upgrade for Opportunist, but you can ignore the disarm option. I would ignore Distract. Fully upgrade Quick Hands and Dash, but you don't need to prioritize these options. For Thrust, get the push upgrades ASAP and get the damage option when you can. Prioritize the push and disarm upgrades for Rushing Kick, and then get the damage option when you can. Fully upgrade Overclock and heavily prioritize these options. Combine Mercurial with characters who can heal and tank. You also need a heavy damage dealer for bosses who cannot be eliminated with a push. Other push characters also complement her well because sometimes she can only set an enemy up on a ledge, so it's nice if another character can follow up on her work. Do all this and she'll be an absolute monster for you. Kinetic is desperately searching for their lost older brother Trevor, who raised them and left to be a hero when his power started manifesting. Even before their brother's disappearance, Kinetic dealt with serious anger issues, and that rage builds up into a power that must be released, lest it destroy them. Their conversations revolve around dealing with that anger while fighting against the company and trying to locate Trevor. I never heard it stated directly, but it's pretty apparent that Kinetic is trans. Having Kinetic in the party is very useful because they can help allies charge their ultimates faster. They also deal very respectable single target damage and have a decent amount of health, so while they cannot tank, Kinetic isn't squishy either. All of this means there really isn't a situation where Kinetic is a bad option, but I would also argue it requires more effort to make them effective compared to the heroes I chose to focus on. Their passive is Opportunist, and once again, it's the weak sauce version that just allows you to increase the damage by 1. No counterattack upgrade available here. Again, they have more health than some options, and most of their damaging abilities are in melee, so this isn't bad to have. The other passive is Conduit, which provides allies within 1 square of Kinetic an ultimate charge whenever they defeat an enemy. You can increase the range of its ability by 1, and it's alright, but honestly, most of the time your squad will be very spread out, and this isn't super useful. Impulse allows you to damage one enemy within 3 squares for half a point and delay it for 3 turns. Adjacent enemies are pushed back 1 square. This is actually pretty decent because oftentimes elites will be surrounded by trash mobs who can be pushed into perilous situations. The usefulness of this power grows when you take the upgrade that makes it target 4 enemies instead of just 1. I think some of the other mechanics on this list are more important, but it's definitely something to consider. If you team up with Ignis, then the usefulness of this ability grows a little bit because it allows you to put fire in an area. The other upgrades increase push, range, and damage by 1. All of them are worth picking up if you use this regularly, which personally I did not, and I'd probably skip this. Disarm does the same thing it does for everybody else, except this version has 0 upgrades and you'll probably use it very rarely. Recharge allows you to select 1 ally within 7 tiles and give them 1 ultimate charge. Obviously, this is really nice and helps to get your key companion to their ultimate ability much faster. The upgrades increase the range by 1 and, more importantly, allowing using this power to provide Kinetic with a charge as well, which is absolutely fantastic. Prioritize getting that upgrade. Combo will damage an adjacent enemy for 3 points while also delaying them for 1 turn and charging Kinetic's ultimate ability. Kinetic is the only character who can just straight up punch an enemy, no backstab, no vulnerability, nothing extra, and deal 3 points of damage, which will kill the average trash mob and put a good dent into everybody else. Upgrades increase the delay by 2 and the damage by 0.5. These upgrades are inexpensive, so I definitely would say they are worth picking up. It's also worth noting Mercurial has a team up for this power that adds 2 disarm points, and even better, there's a team up with Weathervane that has them cast chain lightning on your punch, potentially damaging a large group of enemies. Remember that Kinetic in turn can buff Weathervane's ultimate ability, so they definitely pair together nicely. Next is Punch, which damages an adjacent enemy for 1 point while also charging your ult for 2 points. Obviously, this helps you trigger an ultimate ability very quickly. Upgrades increase the range by 2, making this significantly more useful, and also increase your initiative by 3, which is probably more of a late game pickup. There's a nice team up here with Facet, who adds 1 damage point to the ability. Kinesis is their ultimate power and deals 1 point of damage, push, and disarm to all enemies within 7 squares straight out from where Kinetic directs this blast. Honestly, in my opinion, it looks awesome, but in practice, it's not really helping you all that much. In some rare cases, you might be able to trigger this when enemies are around multiple explosive barrels or close to a ledge, and of course in those situations it will shine. Otherwise, it's a pinprick that enemies will wave off. Upgrades will increase the disarm, push, and range by 1, and also add 0.5 damage. All of this makes it a little more decent, but still nothing to write home about. Honestly, that's the way I feel about this character's mechanics overall. Kinetic excels in helping your team get ultimates faster, but many of them have great ways to trigger ults quickly anyway. So to me, it doesn't really make sense to have a party member wholly dedicated to that task. Let's put it all together. I would take the Opportunist upgrade and the one for Conduit. I would take the Push and Area upgrades for Impulse, while the other 2 you can get if you happen to have extra points. I would heavily prioritize fully upgrading Recharge. Combos upgrades can be ignored. Take the first 2 range upgrades for Punch, and I would fully upgrade Kinesis, but it's not a high priority. Do this, and Kinetic will keep your party triggering ultimates constantly. Ignis is a TV host and media personality who is always live streaming her battles and asking people to subscribe to her content. I cannot stand her character, and I fully recognize the irony of that, so don't bother pointing it out to me. There's levels to this influencer's space, and her constant need for attention rubs me the wrong way, but she is definitely unique amongst your superhero squad. Most of her conversations revolve around breaching Doctrine security to live stream from locations that she shouldn't be, and just in general being a pain. Her mechanics are incredible though, as she is focused on wielding fire to decimate enemies. Late game, you face a ton of 1 health enemies who can constantly respawn from stations and attempt to swarm your heroes. Ignis by far is the best at dealing with them by not only dishing out fire damage, but also creating burning spaces that they have to walk over, which destroy them as well. With the right setup, Weathervane can hit more targets, but at the beginning of a battle, all things being equal, I think Ignis is your best area of effect bomber. To make it a little more clear how her mechanics work, we are going to go a little bit out of order. Fire Eater allows Ignis to consume all fire adjacent to her, and this charges her ultimate ability. So not only do you need to deal fire damage, but you also need to place her into the fire to unlock her ultimate and charge her for more powerful effects. The first upgrade will increase the area of effect when triggering exploding barrels, and it will make Ignis immune to the blast, which obviously is really freaking fun. You can also increase the amount of time that enemies or squares burn, which is also very useful for reasons we'll get into later. Ignite sets Ignis on fire and inflames adjacent spaces that she then absorbs to charge her ultimate ability for 6 points. Keep in mind her ultimate requires significantly more points to become fully charged compared to other party members. Upgrades will increase the charge by 3 points, which is absolutely essential. Alright, now let's circle back down to the bottom. Afterburner damages enemies who attack Ignis in melee while she's ignited. That should be pretty much constant, and again, she has to go wherever the fire is to generate more charge, so she'll oftentimes get hit. This will help her hit back, so take it, and its upgrade which slightly increases the damage sooner rather than later. Flame Teleport allows her to move up to 7 squares to the nearest inflamed tile. This move ignores obstacles and elevation. Note that it is considered to be a move, so you still have 2 actions to attack with after doing this. Ignis will automatically devour any nearby fire once this move is complete, and absolutely this is very useful, so make sure to get the upgrade which increases its range. Kinetic has a great team up with this power that gives Ignis 4 additional ultimate charges. Circling back to Mercurial, this is why her dash team up with Ignis is so useful. She'll create a long path of fire, and then Ignis can teleport anywhere along that line, so she has a better angle at attacking enemies while also getting some charge to boot. Hot Disarm lets you target an enemy within 3 squares and disarm them for 1 point. Upgrades will bring the disarm up to 3 points, which is very useful for a power that can be used at range. Keep in mind, this does reduce your charge, so you have to consider carefully whether or not it's worth it. Other upgrades will increase the range by 2 and permanently destroy the disarmed weapon. The second part is critical because some elite enemies charge up using a specific weapon, so destroying it significantly reduces their potential damage and threat. A couple of other mechanics here take precedent, but I would definitely invest in this ability. Heal restores 1 point of health in exchange for 8 charges. Again, Ignis has to be in the line of fire. She doesn't have any defensive abilities, so this is very useful. Upgrades will increase the healing by 1 and reduce the charge necessary by 2, and I recommend you take both options. Fire Blast requires you to have a charge of 9, so at the beginning of a match, you won't be able to use it. Once you meet that requirement, this power will burn spaces and enemies up to 4 tiles away in front of you. Obviously, this is very useful to set enemies on fire and to create areas where you can get a charge. Notice this doesn't actually do any damage. It's about setting enemies up for what's to come. The first upgrade will reduce the required charge by 2, and absolutely you want to prioritize this option. The other upgrades will increase its range and allow it to do a small amount of damage. These are nice to have, but certainly not high priorities. Firebolt deals 1 damage to an enemy within 5 squares and sets them, along with that tile, on fire. If you have a charge of at least 4, this ability becomes a fireball, which will also inflame all adjacent squares. This allows her to essentially bomb enemies from afar, setting multiple foes on fire, especially if they are nearby explosive canisters. Upgrades will increase the range by 1, reduce the charge requirement by 1, increase the initial damage by 0.25, and turn the burn area into a square so that it impacts a significantly wider area. Pick up all of these options. Finally, her ultimate ability is Inferno, and this deals up to 3 points of damage to all enemies within 7 tiles who are on fire. How much damage is dealt depends on how much charge your ultimate has, so it's best to use this when you are fully charged and when as many enemies as possible are set on fire. So similar to Weathervane, Ignis is fantastic against trash mobs who can be wiped out with 3 points of damage or less, but she requires a lot of setup in order to really make this shine. Setting large groups of enemies on fire in one turn won't really be feasible until late in the game, so usually it will be 2 or maybe even 3 turns before it really makes sense to trigger her ultimate. Also note that once her ultimate is used, it clears all fire from the squares and enemies that it touches, so essentially you are starting over from scratch. Ignis is a lot of fun and her mechanics are unique, but I felt there was a little too much micromanagement to make her a permanent member of the squad. The upgrades will increase the damage slightly for Inferno and give it a little bit more range, which are both nice if you're going to use this on a regular basis. Alright, let's put all of this together. I would take Afterburner and its upgrade while also selecting the upgrade for Flaying Teleport. I would also fully upgrade Fire Eater. I would upgrade Hot Disarm, but I don't think you need to prioritize that until late mid-game. I would also fully upgrade Heal and Fire Blast. I would fully upgrade Firebolt, and frankly, these are the upgrades that I would heavily prioritize, along with the ones for Ignite. The Inferno upgrades are also nice to have. Be sure to combo her with party members who can tank and or heal. Characters who can push are also useful since enemies can be pushed into the fire. You'll also want a heavy damage dealer with her to take out the enemies with high health. Do all this and she'll be melting enemies before your eyes with no problem. Last on the list, and the last party member you'll recruit, is Hyde, a tech prodigy who previously worked for one of the main supervillains, but now is determined to ensure his creations are no longer used for evil. He's of course highly interested in technology, research, and running experiments. He doesn't have powers per se, and instead utilizes nanotechnology to create effects that devastate enemies. He can effectively serve in a tank role for the squad, although as previously mentioned, he does it in a completely different way from Facet. In grueling marathon encounters where you have to hold the line against waves of foes who rush into melee distance, he really shines. Nano Revive is a passive that allows him to revive allies from up to 3 squares away. Oftentimes, if allies have been down, they are surrounded by big trouble, so being able to revive them remotely is a huge boon. The upgrade will increase the range on this by 1, and if your companions are consistently getting knocked out, I would suggest you take it. Nano Disarm will disarm an enemy for 1 point up to 5 squares away. This is okay, but again, Hyde is the last companion you recruit, and by now many enemies have 3 or even 4 points of disarm, so 1 isn't really doing anything. The second upgrade increases the disarm effect by 1, which makes this much more viable, so if you don't have a better disarm option on your regular team, then prioritize this. The first upgrade increases the range, which is also useful, while the last upgrade lowers the target's initiative by 2, and I would skip that. First Aid allows you to heal an ally up to 5 squares away by 1 point. In case you haven't noticed, there are no other powers which allow you to heal allies during fights, so this is actually huge to help cover up for your mistakes. Upgrades will increase the range by 3, and I would absolutely recommend you take both of them. Kinetic has a really nice team up on this power that also provides Hyde with a point of charge when healing allies. Definitely nice to have in tough fights. Decoy creates a figure for 1 turn that can be targeted by enemies. This figure has 2 health, and enemies will absolutely prioritize attacking it over your allies if they are further away. Every hit on the decoy increases Hyde's charge. Hyde only requires 3 charges to trigger his ultimate, which is the lowest amount among all of your party members. Upgrades give the decoy 1 point of disarm and damage that trigger when enemies attack it, while also increasing the turn duration by 1. I recommend picking up all of these upgrades. Ignis has a nice team up on the power that causes enemies who hit the decoy to take extra damage and become burned. That, in tandem with Hyde's ability to heal allies at range while also providing some tanking to divert some of the pressure and hopefully group enemies together, makes him a wonderful complement to her playstyle. Nano Field creates an area of effect that deals 0.5 damage to enemies when they attack your allies while inside of it. So basically use this around your decoy or facet and then trigger some damage accordingly. Nothing crazy, but could be useful in the right situation. The first upgrade will increase his range, which is nice to have, and the second upgrade reduces the target's initiative by 1, which is an option you can skip or wait until later to pick up. Nano Strike is Hyde's main damage dealing ability, and it targets enemies within 5 squares for 1 damage. That's inconsequential, but with upgrades, its damage is increased by 1 and the target's initiative is reduced by 1 as well. Sometimes it's important to just help whittle down a boss's health, so I would definitely invest in picking up these upgrades. Last on the list is Nano Titan, which has Hyde activating all of his nanos to become a giant titan. This character has his own movement and action points along with completely separate abilities. That means you can use all of Hyde's movement and actions and then activate this ultimate to get a brand new list of mechanics you can immediately use. Throwing out your decoy to tank one group while advancing with your Nano Titan to tank another group is very effective. The Titan is 2x2, so you must have enough room in order for it to move. This power lasts until enemies whittle down your 4 bars of health or after 2 turns. You can also manually turn off the Titan, but not on the same turn when you activate it. The Titan's health is separate from Hyde's health, so regardless of whether you turn it off or if enemies destroy it, his health will still be at whatever level it was at before activating the Titan. At first, the Titan will come with 2 attack options. Nano Punch targets all enemies in one direction within 2 squares from the Titan and deals 1 point of damage while also pushing them back 1 square. Great for a character who will be tanking and having enemies surrounding him. Facet has a great team up with this power that adds 1 point of damage. The other attack is Slam, which hits all adjacent enemies, pushing them back 2 squares, disarming them for 1 point and damaging them for 1 point. Again, great to have for a character who is surrounded. Upgrades will provide the Titan with +1 damage and turn duration, along with a 50% reduction to damage. You also get 1 attack called Swarm, which lets you dash in a straight line, knocking enemies 1 square off to the side and dealing 1 damage to them. I recommend you be sure to pick up all of these options. Alright, let's put it all together. Hyde is a tank and healer with a wee bit of damage all in one. I would say he's more durable than Facet, and he's the only healer in the game. I still preferred Facet since he can directly protect other heroes while also immobilizing enemies. 2 things Hyde cannot do. I would pick up the Nano Revive upgrade and skip all of the Nano Disarm options. I would get the heal upgrades, but they are a low priority. I would get all of the decoy upgrades and highly prioritize them. I would unlock Nano Field, but you can skip the upgrades. I would take all of the Nano Strike upgrades and fully upgrade the Titan as well. Do this, and I think you will find Hyde to be a very useful member of the group as long as you pair him with other heavy damage dealers. Finally, that is it. You now have all the information I've picked up regarding how to get the most out of these characters. Hopefully you have found the information informative, and this will help you enjoy capes as much as I have. To reiterate, I would love to hear who is your favorite party member and which team do you plan to use once picking up this game. Is there any other content regarding capes that you would like to see? Let me know down in the comments, and I hope all of you enjoyed this video. Take care.